Holy deja vu, Tim. A concerned citizen spotted bit-part character actors from the 60s slinking around the old abandoned actors studio.
Great Vito Scotti, Paul, old chum. There's not a second to lose.
To the bat polls!
Welcome to the Bat Polls, where we've been working on this show for weeks.
Days, even.
This is Tim in Tokyo with my brother Paul in Hanover, New Hampshire.
That's who I am and where I am.
We opened this time with the WDR, or should I say WDR in German, WDR Big Band out of Germany. This is the jazz version with live musicians that I referred to a few episodes back when we heard that computerized jazz version, probably done in GarageBand or something. Yeah, this is live musicians, as you can see in the video, which I'll, of course, put in the show notes. Uploaded January 25th, 2023 on the WDR Big Band channel on YouTube. WDR refers to a radio station in Cologne.
Got it.
And this is a really interesting arrangement. They start out with the bridge, and then they go back and do the bat spin and the horn blasts, for punches and the main melody. It was really different.
Yeah, I like that. It prepares you for this being Batman-like before you're positive that it's the Batman theme, unless you've read the notation at or the name of the file. But yeah, I mean, it only spottily goes through the
the bridge.
It just plays a phrase or two of the bridge.
They do that at the beginning, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and the trombones. I'm a trombonist, at least I used to be, so it's awfully fun to hear the bass trombones getting, such a chance to let her rip.
Yeah, I think the theme versions we like are the ones either that are well performed or unique and interesting in some way. I think this one's both. Yep,
the performance is impeccable. I love watching conductors of big bands because they really just kind of stand there and snap their fingers while grooving to their own bands, and then they cut in when there's a big change in dynamics or a new section comes in. You can suddenly see them getting active. That's kind of the way our band director, Mr. Earl Dickinson, back in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, used to direct jazz band as well, at least by the time I was in high school. But yeah, they're great. The only thing I didn't enjoy was the unison saxophone bit, which seemed like there were too many possibilities for error or for making the section sound like a bunch of sixth graders. Because if anybody's off, it's even a little bit out of tune when everyone's playing unison like that. The bass, the soprano saxes, the tenor saxes, it all kind of falls to mush. I think that could have been arranged in a different way that would have made it more attractive, or made the saxophones more attractive. But other than that, I love the variations that are being done with the theme here. It's a lot of fun, and the bash pow stuff with the brass was great. When that cuts in, it's like, yeah, okay, this is it.
Yep, this is Batman.
Yep.
So this time we're talking about a Batman cast reunion that took place on The Late Show with Ross Shafer on Fox Network, April 28th, 1988. There are two different videos of this show on YouTube, and in our show notes we're linking to the superior version. The ads are cut out, the sound is better, the opening is complete. It's just a better quality all around. And later on, in my notes, I put like timings that things happen. I don't know if I will refer to that later. And that's based on that video with the ads removed.
Mm-hmm. I just want to cut in just for a second to say that when Tim says best version, or talks about the quality, quote unquote, he's talking about the audiovisual quality and fidelity. We have a lot to say about the actual quality, but if anybody, I'm sure that lots of listeners to the podcast have seen and heard this monstrosity. Sorry, I'm letting the cat out of the bag here. It's infamous, and we'll get into some of the reasons why as a Batman reunion.
So Fox itself, the network, had only started 3 years earlier. At this point, they only had primetime shows on Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. Late Night started in October of 1986, hosted by Joan Rivers. She was fired in May 1987, and then they went through an assortment of hosts before Shafer came on in 1988. And he was not there all that long. It was less than a year before it was canceled. Yeah, Wikipedia says by the time Shafer began hosting, ratings were so low that the show could only attract newsmakers and human interest-style guests. This led to a format change in the summer, so after this episode, to focus on tabloid and ripped-from-the-headline stories. And the show was canceled in October.
That ripped from the headline stories on a talk show is kind of hard to imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. They interviewed somebody who was in a sex scandal or something. I don't know.
Well, even their musical talent was third, fourth, fifth tier. Although I did hear Shafer say at the end of this episode that next week, or their next episode was going to feature Mr. Mister.
Yeah.
So, that was relatively high tier, I think, although, songs like Broken Wings don't age that well, but, hindsight is 20/20.
And I'm thinking that the fact that Fox was still pretty new, a lot of people there probably didn't have much experience. I don't know what the funding situation was like. I mean, I'm sure Rupert Murdoch must have backed up a dump truck full of money to the place, but I don't know. I'm guessing that, just the newness and lack of experience led to some of the errors in putting this episode together.
Right. I'm guessing, too, that this is a slightly different kind of guess, but when a new network or, a new whatever organization starts, trying to imitate other networks' shows, like, in this case, Johnny Carson, David Letterman, they generally try to bring in, really good people who've done this before, who've worked, as talk show producers and such. The problem, as I am just imagining it, seems to have been, and there's some hints of this in the Wikipedia entry about The Late Show, that there were difficulties with convincing the upper echelon of management at Fox that they needed to do X or Y, or they needed to improve X or Y. And so that meant that in some cases, most likely producers' hands would have been tied. They would know what to do, but they weren't getting the funding or the okay from above to go ahead and do it. And, Joan Rivers went on to have a morning talk show that ran for 5 seasons. It was very successful. She did great. I think she might have even won an Emmy for being an announcer or being the host of that show. So it's not as if I don't even know what the conditions or situation was for her firing. Maybe it was that she was too blue, that her jokes were too out there. And at this point, some stations like Fox had bought a CBN station, but CBN, a Christian Broadcasting Network affiliate, which apparently there was such a thing at the time. Fox had bought it, but before the sale went through, the CBN owners of the network wouldn't allow certain kinds of jokes, and so I'm not sure that they even allowed Joan Rivers. They wouldn't run it. They wouldn't run the show. And so there were troubles with affiliates that, nobody in the upper reaches of the ranks of Fox had any idea what to do about stuff like that.
Yeah, as far as her firing, Wikipedia says that behind-the-scenes relations between Rivers and the network executives quickly eroded. So it must have been just personality conflict, not so much that she did something bad. So we need to talk about lots of things.
It sounds like an intervention.
Yeah, well, it's a little late to intervene in this tragedy, but
true enough.
So Ross Shafer. So as I quoted at the beginning of the episode, Shafer says they'd been working on the show for weeks. It's too bad he didn't spend more of that time researching Batman.
Perhaps watching an episode or two, if you could find one in 1988.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was no DVD. I mean, there wasn't MeTV. I don't know. There must have been some local affiliate showing Batman.
Yeah, the even the basic cable market was much narrower in terms of choices than it is today. So MeTV, I don't think even got started until the 21st century.
But he does claim to have watched some Batman recently.
I'll tell you, I've watched a number of the episodes recently for this show, and watching it as a young man, I really got into it. But now watching, I realized that the Batman show, you had it on two levels. The adults really enjoyed the humor, I think, of this. And holy lower back pain and holy this and that. And that was really for the adults, wasn't it?
Well, right. I think that's why the show has stayed around and it hasn't worn out its welcome. It's become a classic. I understand it's a timeless show because of that.
They have clips that are in the show. Those seem to be the only episodes he watched. I don't know, he's just not very well prepared here to ask questions about the show. So many of his questions tend to be like, how did you feel about accepting the role? Were you interested in it? And then what did you do after the show? Or how did the show, doing the show affect your career afterwards? And he hardly asks anything about actually the show.
Right. Well, there's a little bit of that sort of thing when it comes to Eartha Kitt, I thought. I could be wrong about that.
Well, they talk, they have her do the purr. There's a lot of that, do that thing you used to do kind of bits too. And I just this evening I watched the Gilligan's Island reunion they did a few weeks later.
Yes.
Which actually overall I think is done a little better than this one. Maybe they learned something from this disaster.
Well, maybe we should enumerate what the problems are.
Right.
Just kind of, have a punch list.
Well, one thing that's really noticeable is, so he does correctly say early on that it was 2.5 seasons, but then when he introduces Yvonne Craig, he screws up and says Batgirl came on in season 2.
Yeah.
The Caped Crusader got some help in his fight against crime during the show's second season when Batgirl came on the scene.
And when Yvonne mentions Barbara Gordon, he doesn't recognize the name, or he seems to be thinking of a different Barbara Gordon. Because she's talking about how a little girl recognized her in the store, and she says, I know who you are, you're Barbara Gordon. And Ross says, well, how did a little girl know Barbara Gordon? And Yvonne says, well, that's Batgirl's other identity. He's like, oh, I see.
Did he think she said Barbara Feldon?
Yeah, I don't know who he thought she was talking about. There is a Canadian actress named Barbara Gordon who had appeared in 10 films and many more TV shows by 1988. Perhaps that's who came to Ross Shafer's mind.
So his preparation in general, when it comes to bringing out the guests and asking them questions, you're right. He seems much more interested in what you did before Batman and what you've been doing since. Was Batman bad for your career? I mean, that's the kind of question that everybody has to ask Adam West, at least at this point in his career, in the 80s, 22 years after the show first aired. It's the right question to ask, even if you know the answer. But at the same time, it seems as though West was so flabbergasted at being asked that question again. It was like, I don't want to talk about
Well, yeah,
it.
he fakes sobbing. Like, do we have to go there or something?
You know what? The show was on 2.5 seasons.
Yes.
That's right. I'm going to ask you first. Did you have any trouble shaking the image, or is that something you didn't want to shake?
Oh, don't do this. Why do we start this way, Ross?
Okay, Bert.
Well, yeah, you can't run around in tights and with your underwear outside your pants and in a mask, obsessively fighting crime every moment of 24 hours a day without it creating a bit of a career problem.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how much preparation was actually done with members of the cast. But, here's my biggest problem with the whole thing, and this is not the last problem we'll talk about on this punch list. It's that there were way too many people on stage and no plans for what to do with half of them. Certainly they had a plan for Eartha Kitt because she actually sings, which is great. But, I'm going to say it for the millionth time it's been spoken in human history. Poor Alan Napier. I mean, sure, I understand why they put him on at the very, very end, because he's very old, and having him sit on stage all of that time, watching everything else happen probably would have been, burdensome for him. But, he's clearly charming. Yvonne Craig is cracking up at what he's saying because he's going to go on some shaggy dog tale, it sounds like, about, being Alfred being the illegitimate son of a lord. And then Shafer just slowly pulls the mic away from him, and his voice kind of trails off.
Well, I mean, he seems to be watching the director saying, it's time to wrap it up, it's time to wrap it up.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah, and who can blame the director for telling him that? But to put him on at the end was really disrespectful because he wasn't going to have a chance to do anything.
I have a few other things to say first, but I've got in my notes a whole breakdown of how the time was used over the whole show.
Very good.
But I mean, as fans, we really wanted him to ask questions about things about in the show itself. And I'm wondering how reasonable an expectation that is. I mean, even if he had, watched every episode twice in the lead up to this and read Eisner's Bat Book, which had come out a couple years before, I don't know. I mean, would Carson or Letterman have asked better questions? I mean, is it right to expect them to kind of get into details of the show in an environment like this?
That's a great question. I think you may be onto something. That what else could be done in this format, and what else could be done if Shafer and the producers of the show wanted to speak to the whole audience rather than just to the bat freaks. And so, the kinds of questions they ask, A, because there was so little time, because it was so divided up among all of these guests, and B, or two, or whatever I started with, they just, need to think about the questions being questions that could entertain the audience, the answers to which, that would not be about obscure moments from the show. I mean, not obscure to us, but certainly obscure to most audiences.
Yeah, especially in an era when you couldn't just pop in the DVD or stream the show, like watch episode after episode. Yeah, you just had to wait for it to be on in syndication somewhere near you.
Or wait for your neighbor down the block to invite you over for beers to watch all of the episodes of blank that he'd taped over the last 6 months.
Right. Another thing is that, I mean, in the Gilligan's Island reunion, like Russell Johnson is talking about how people ask him about specific scenes from the show, like how did you do that, and he doesn't remember anymore because it's been over 20 years. So that's another problem, is as we've seen many times before in interviews like by Eisner and others, that memories fade, and you can go to the horse's mouth, but the horse may not remember what happened.
Well, and there's such a difference between watching a show in reruns, let's say, a syndicated show, and having been part of that show, insofar as you as a viewer, like we watched every episode of Gilligan's Island probably at least 3 or 4 times, right? Maybe more than that, but I'm just trying to be realistic here. We would tend to exaggerate it.
Must have seen Eva Grubb half a dozen times at least.
Yeah. But, as fans, we get fixated on those specific episodes and specific moments from episodes. But for Tina Louise and Russell Johnson, it's just another day on the set.
Yeah, and they haven't watched it in 20 years, let alone experienced it.
They don't probably have neither opportunity nor inclination to watch the Eva Grubb episode as many times as we did. Even if it was just by accident because we were just home from school and eating our orange slices in front of the TV, we really wanted, to watch something, and we didn't have many choices. So, different era of TV, but also very different experience between the viewers and the stars.
Yeah. On the other hand, in the Gilligan episode, there were some stories shared about like things that happened on the set that during specific episodes. And it would have been nice to have a little more of that in the Batman reunion. There's really almost none of that.
Well, there were 2 attempts, one by Burt Ward and one by Frank Gorshin, but in both cases, they got interrupted by Shafer bringing on another guest.
Right.
It really leaves an impression, and I thought, so it really doesn't have to be a gimmicky laugh. It just has to be honest, because the character is pretty bizarre,
Oh, excuse me. It's a bad phone.
Look at that warm red glow here in the day.
Yes. Oh, Alfred, thanks. Yeah. It looks like we have. Yeah. All right. Oh, sure. We'll send her in. Okay. Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't get to finish my story.
No, not now, Frank. Oh,
forget it.
Not now.
Well, okay. Let's get into that aspect of it.
Okay.
So we've got, what did I count? So we got Adam, Bert, Frank, Yvonne, that's 4. Blah, blah, blah.
Julie Newmar.
Julie, that's what I was going for. Yeah, Julie, Alan Napier, George Barris, Eartha Kitt, and exactly 1 minute of tape of Cesar Romero. So that's 9 people. And he's trying to do it in a traditional, like Johnny Carson type format, where somebody comes on, talks a while, then the next guest comes on, and the first guest stays on the stage. And then you've got like people piling up on the stage who aren't participating in the conversation at all. Frank looked pretty bored at one point.
Well, and Shafer's telling him, he's jokingly saying, "Stop talking. Don't talk anymore.
Yeah,
keep him quiet." And he was just in the middle of what sounded like it was rearing up to be a great story, and I didn't care if I'd heard it before. I just wanted to hear Frank tell it, because Frank...
About how he developed the voice of the Riddler and the laugh or whatever.
Yeah, he's talking about... He's telling the whole Richard Widmark from, Kiss of Death story, which I really wanted to hear from the horse's mouth, even if it wasn't accurate. Even if he'd forgotten the details, I still wanted to hear him talk about it. And that was, stopped abruptly by, oh, look, it's Julie Newmar, and boy, is she hot. That was pretty much the content of their interview until they got into her having a child at 47 and writing a book about that experience.
I was waiting for Adam to hand Ross a handkerchief to wipe the slobber off his face.
Or for Julie to wipe Shafer's slobber off her face.
Well, yeah, that might happen too. I was thinking... It would have been, I think, reasonable to set this up as a round table. Just bring everybody on and introduce them all, and then ask a question of the whole group and get different answers. I think that would have been more satisfying.
Yeah. I think so. It kind of would have been a different show. I don't mean that, anything's better than Late Night with Ross Shafer. But it would have been more like Charlie Rose or something. And I know Charlie Rose is not exactly, he's persona non grata now. But when he would have, a few people around his table, there would be a real chance to discuss and, dig back into memories and such.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the DVD of Fridays, the ABC late night comedy show from the early 80s that we were big fans of, and you got me a DVD of the Best of Fridays, and that one of the extras on that is a discussion among most of the cast members, later, around for the purpose of the DVD, and that was pretty interesting. And I don't think there was even a moderator there; just the cast talking about the show. And yeah, to see that with Batman could have been interesting, but
oh yeah, I would have paid a lot to see that.
Do you like comics? The 1960s? How about middle-aged gay couples gossiping about their neighbors? Then you'll love Checkered Past.
A loving examination of DC's Go-Go Check branded comic magazines published from February 1966 to August 1967.
I'm Dr. Bob.
And I'm Dr. Husband.
And each week we'll be your hosts on a trippy tour through mid-century four-color madness. Checkered Past. Available wherever fine podcasts are downloaded for free.
Okay, so the entire commercial-free video is 44 minutes and 26 seconds. So show starts.
It seems to be about 4.5 hours long.
The show starts, and so apparently, I looked into this a bit. So the Baltimore Orioles were on a losing streak at the time. This, of course, the baseball season had started a couple weeks earlier, and apparently Shafer was tracking that, and he was checking in with this DJ in Baltimore, Bob Rivers, who was doing this marathon on the air night and day until the team got a win. And as it happened, the day after this broadcast, the Orioles got their first win. But Wikipedia says that Rivers was on the air for 11 straight days before their April 29th win. The Orioles went 54-107 that year. And so the show spends about 2 minutes on that. And I'm like, time's a wasted, and you've got 8 people sitting backstage waiting to come on.
Oh, I know.
But, and then he wastes time on this stupid bat quiz with these goofy questions where the answers are jokes based on out-of-context footage from the show. I mean, if it had been legitimate trivia, it might have been a little better, but it's not even legitimate trivia. It's just gags.
Right. The third answer of these multiple choice questions is always the right one because it's the punchline.
Right. Well, it's the same as Letterman used to do quizzes like that too, where the punchline was always answer C or D or whatever. Yeah,
but he didn't have the 3/4 of the cast of the Batman show backstage.
No. Yeah, he had a reasonable number of guests waiting backstage who had not worked together necessarily.
Right, and there was no joke about, the audience supposedly having to call out the answer, which was about as potted a version of audience participation as I've ever seen.
See? Yeah, anyway.
And this is for you people at home. I want you to just follow along with me, take this little bat quiz, see if you remember some of these things, and you can score at home. First of all, I want you to play along here. When Batman's uniform caused uncomfortable chafing, what did he do to relieve that discomfort? Did he A, scratch the itch, B, change uniforms, or C, crawl along the floor in a disgusting manner? Okay. All right, wait a minute. Let's check your guess. Oh, you got it right. You guys got it right.
So at the 7-minute mark, he finally introduces Adam and Bert. And they come on they get the most, time, I would say.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense because they were the stars of the show. But even so, this show has set up this dumb conceit where the next guest interrupts the conversation by talking into a mic off stage. It happens repeatedly. It's very frustrating because someone's, like you said, with Frank in the midst of telling a story. So then there's an ad break in there and a clip. And so 8.5 minutes later, then Frank talks into a microphone off stage in the midst of Burt Ward talking about the two golden cats and avoiding exactly what the position was that they had been laid in during the filming of the show that had Adam and Burt cracking up for several minutes.
I hadn't realized that there might have been something artful about interrupting him just then. Something that the internal censors said, no way, stop him. We know where this is going.
Yeah, well, I felt like Burt was kind of in the middle of the story, maybe, and then realized where he was, and so then he just says the position that the cats were in made us laugh.
There were at least 68 other positions it could have been in. They could have been in, I should say.
Right, well put. So Frank gets a decent amount of time, too. And then at the 23-minute mark, this bat phone starts beeping with a beep that sounds nothing like the bat phone.
Yes, useful to point out.
And Ross takes a call saying that Julie is coming. And so she comes out. And we are now more than halfway through the show, and we're just introducing guest number 4.
And her dance, while lovely, she dances all the way from upstage to downstage. It's lovely, but it takes up more time than it would simply to walk on the stage.
So, yeah, that's at 23 minutes in. And then at 28:30, Eartha, again, talking into a microphone from backstage, saying, I am the real Catwoman. And so she comes in. Yeah, and they talk with her a few minutes. And then after the ad break, she's going to do a song. And I'm like, you don't have time for someone to sing here. I mean, the performance is great. She does I Want to Be Evil. But, I mean, you've still got a few people. You got Yvonne backstage. You got George Barris backstage. You got Alan Napier backstage. And you've got that clip of Cesar Romero. And you've only got about 15 minutes left. And when Eartha is just coming on. So she does her song. At 36 minutes and 20 seconds, you got less than 10 minutes left of airtime. Minus commercials, Caesar is introduced. There's a 15-second clip and a 45-second clip of... the clip is from Joker Goes to School. 45-second clip of Ross talking with Caesar. And that's it. That's the Cesar Romero minute.
Then, and we've already seen Caesar in Batman for a minute or two during the Eartha Kitt clip.
Oh, right.
Because it's a third season, Joker Catwoman team up.
Right. And then Yvonne gets about 3 minutes, including a 40-second clip of the outdoor fight in the Londinium trilogy. Then we get about 1 minute of talking with George Barris, and then the very frustrating, hard-to-watch 1-minute interview with Alan Napier. And it just feels like, just so poorly planned that, obviously you give the two main stars of the show the most time, I guess, but it just feels like they kind of forgot that the hour had to include commercials or something.
Yeah, seems very much.
We've got an hour to do this, so.
Yeah, freshman mistake.
15 minutes or commercials? Well.
Well, I don't get the feeling that Ross cares one way or the other. He's just gonna, his teeth will just glisten in the footlights. And I called him last night when Tim and I were texting about this. I called him, a haircut in a suit, and I don't have any reason to think anything more about him.
Okay, so. I mean, we do have the cast talking here, and I tried to make some notes of interesting things that they said. I mean, some of it's stuff we've heard before in their autobios or in other interviews. But yeah, there were maybe some interesting things. Let's kind of go through what they talked about. So Adam and Bert come on. Shafer asks about the enthusiastic response from the studio audience and whether it's surprising 2 decades later. So, that's a reasonable question. I mean, the same thing comes up with Gilligan's Island, of course, that, like all these years later, it's still super popular. So they talk about that a little bit. And then, about shaking the image of Batman. Yeah, when Adam says, "Why do we start this way, Ross?" And then he asked Bert about residuals.
That really caught my ear, obviously. I know I've read about this in the past, but to hear him talk about exactly the year at which, one could, after which one could earn residuals in perpetuity, and they didn't make it. The show was filmed too early.
Yeah, he says pre-1969 contracts only included about 2 years of residuals. It was through the 10th run.
Wow.
All right, Bert, what about the residuals? What about these, over the years, 22 years of residuals build up, make you a rich man? Or?
Well, it built up, I think, for the studio, but not for Adam and I.
Oh, is that?
Because everyone asks about residuals, because I guess it's a big thing. But for us, because we did our show before 1969, residuals were only through the 10th run, so that meant we got about 2 years of residuals. By about 1970, I think we were out of residuals.
Oh, really? So there's no money coming in from
No,
from
not from that.
Huh.
Well, there could be some merchandising money coming in, and as far as residuals, it's kind of cycled out. I think I got 7 cents from Albania last week.
Yeah, and I was looking around on the web to get more information about that, and I really couldn't find much. I'm not sure what occasioned that change. There doesn't seem to have been a strike around that time, but I don't know how that was changed or whatever. It must have been a new contract with the union. But anyway, yeah, so pretty much anybody in 60s TV or before. I mean, I guess syndication wasn't really anticipated when they were making those contracts earlier, certainly in the 50s. So they didn't, because primetime shows basically didn't have reruns for the most part. I was reading that actually I Love Lucy was the first to do that. They had some kind of hang up with the show, and so they ran some reruns, and the ratings were still good. So like, oh, we can do this. So people aren't going to switch to something else. But yeah, apparently the idea of not paying people residuals for many reruns hadn't really been considered, or not enough anyway.
Yeah, those kinds of negotiations that probably led to the 1969 change in the contract language, they would happen all the time. They didn't have to happen because they didn't have to be catalyzed by a strike. SAG-AFTRA, or the Screen Actors Guild, was still going to continue to try to get more out of the studios for their actors, just based on new conditions. Like the same happened when videotape came along. The shows were sold in that fashion.
Right, yeah, technology seems to repeatedly bring up these kinds of changes. Sometimes it takes a strike to get the change, and sometimes...
Right, as it did just,
with
less
AI.
than a month ago.
So Ross talks about rewatching as an adult in the quote-unquote prep for the show.
Yeah, which he may or may not have done. We don't have any proof.
And realizing that the show was made to be humorous for adults as well as exciting for kids. I mean, he could have been, taking the identity of one of his underlings who actually did watch the show and just transplanting the pronoun to I rather than he or she.
That's probably spot on, for better or for worse.
And, it's like a really basic realization about the show that it was made on 2 levels. And so they talk about that. And Bert, now, I was not aware of this. This is pre-Bert working with dogs. He was doing some other kind of project to teach kids good values. And we see a clip of a video that he was involved in with a guy in a bird costume as this character talking about like bullying or something.
I think it might have been a Baltimore Oriole who was, actually being bullied himself, and so was, fighting back with words and language.
But Ed, I don't recall if that came up in Bert's autobio.
I think it did, but I didn't go back to check, of course, because I'm a lazy researcher, and everybody knows it, so we might as well just, compound that complaint.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I did with that book, but I didn't look it up either.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm sure it's, easy enough to look up, but I don't remember it, just maybe because it's so familiar as something that people who play law enforcement of whatever kind on television, tend to get involved in such things because they know it'll continue the same kind of publicity. Mm-hmm. It's a way of kind of, tagging on to the end of their careers on a show by keeping up similar activities.
He talks about it being kind of crime fighting, but not in front of the camera.
Right, civil responsibility, Robin.
Yeah.
Civic responsibility, sorry.
And then Ross says he'll show some of Adam's early work, which is a microscopic clip from Adam's Nestle Quik commercial. They realized at that point anyway that they needed to cut time somewhere, but...
Right.
I could have cut the Baltimore Orioles stuff instead.
Yes, they're filming in Los Angeles, so it's, maybe Ross is an Orioles fan, maybe he's from Baltimore, but we don't ever find that out in this episode.
Yeah, I don't know why they were so focused on that, but... this another question that Ross asks more than once. I think it came up in the Gilligan episode too. Did you ever look at a script and say, no, this is too dumb, we can't do it? But I don't think anybody said yes, because obviously they did it.
Right.
Well,
right.
Unless there was some.
And what are they going to say? No, I'm
taught.
Sorry, stop paying me. I won't do this script. I can think of lots of actors who would say that, especially if they're up and coming.
Then Bert, kind of like a politician, changes the question and starts talking about what we did do was, and he talks about the arranging of the two gold cats. And Adam created a configuration that made me laugh, and they laughed through 16 takes. And then, he's in the midst of that, and then we hear Frank talking over the loudspeaker. So Frank comes in, and he's wearing a derby and a mask. He's not wearing a Riddler costume, but from the neck up, he's the Riddler. Although I don't think Riddler ever wore both the mask and the derby at the same time, did he?
I don't think so. Not to my recollection.
And Frank goofs up a riddle that apparently was scripted with Ross. Like, he keeps forgetting to give the punchline to answer the riddle. And then, he seems out of breath after that. And he's talking about, that he used to do that, all the time. This energetic Riddler character. And then, of all things, he says that he needs a smoke, which is probably the reason why he's out of breath in the first place.
I was going to say, well, that really opens up the old T-zone. Ooh, yeah. My favorite's right next to my heart, as Krusty the Clown would say.
You want to say, no, Frank, don't do that. What are you doing? But, although he kind of chuckles a bit, like he kind of understands that it's ironic that he wants to smoke because he's out of breath.
Right. And it will continue to be ironic until he dies of lung cancer, which is unfortunately what happened.
Yes. And it talks about, Ross's favorite question about whether it helped his career. It was a boon to his career. And Frank talks about how after the first episode was broadcast, he became a headliner in Vegas.
Almost immediately, it seems, at least the way that he tells the story.
Then he talks about watching himself on Batman dubbed in another language.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
And, I meant to look this up. He said he loved Batman comics and he loved the Riddler, and I'm kind of questioning, like, loved the Riddler? The Riddler hardly appeared in any comics, like, before the show came on.
Right.
So I don't know that he would have loved the
just
Riddler.
in the Silver Age, he became, kind of a major Batman character again. But by that time, Gorshin would have been an adult, so it's unlikely he was reading Batman comics at that point.
Well, I mean, I think the Riddler would have been a forgotten villain had it not been for the show.
Now, possibly, but didn't the Riddler come back in the Silver Age?
Well,
during the New Look. So
he debuted in Detective Comics 140 in October 1948.
Well, he appeared again in Batman 171. 65.
Right, yeah, I think that was the second appearance, and that must have been one of the comics that was picked up by Dozier. And so, Dozier had no idea how few times the Riddler had appeared. It was just, he's a Batman villain, and they put him on the show.
Yeah, it looks like from the appearances list I'm seeing here on Comic Vine that he appeared twice in the 40s, in October and December of 1948. And those are both pretty famous stories now, but at the time, probably not so much. And then he reappeared in 65.
So, yeah, he may have read Batman. Maybe he read those Riddler stories in 1948. He would have been about the right age.
Yeah, most likely.
And then the Richard Widmark Kiss of Death thing, talking about, he's saying that the laugh needed to be not a gimmicky one, but an honest one. And what did he mean? I guess, like, not sounding so put on, not gimmicky.
Right, not sounding like a bwah laugh that's meant to be like a supervillain laugh. The thing about Widmark is that, Gorshin is right about this. Widmark in Kiss of Death is giggling when he shoves the woman down the stairs. He sounds like a little kid. He's really enjoying himself, and that's what makes that laugh so chilling. And so that's what Gorshin, I think, was trying to get at, was the legitimacy of the laughter. Like somebody who really thinks something is funny, but what he thinks is funny happens to be, like, really evil.
Yeah.
And Kiss of Death, by the way, is 1947, directed by Henry Hathaway. So that's a year before the Riddler first appeared in Batman and Detective. I think it was just Detective Comics in both cases. Right. Yeah. So, the time works if we're trying to come up with, like, a moment in Gorshin's childhood life where he, kind of formulated his later Riddler persona.
So then, as we mentioned, there's the bat phone call, and Julie comes dancing in, and she's got her dress has this huge bow on the front of it. And she said something about it, but other people were talking, and I couldn't really catch what she said. Did you understand what she said there?
I did not.
No. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of inherent in having so many people on the stage that more than one person's talking, and it's sometimes hard to pick out what anybody says. But, Ross can't stop making comments about her being sexy. When she finishes her kind of dancing in, he says, "How did you guys get any work done?"
And then when she sits down, he says, sit down and make yourself comfortable. Then he says something like, that would kind of defeat the purpose, like, because he wants it apparently just to look at her legs.
You know, legs? There's legs. I do ask you to sit down, but I think it's kind of a waste.
But that all sounds put on to me. Even though, yes, she is beautiful, it just sounds to me like he's basically Ryan Seacrest. He's a robot who says nice things, including, look at those gams. Boop, boop, beep, boop, boop. Holy cats, look at the legs on the Catwoman. Ha, 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 ha. How did you get any work done? Yes, he's the sexual harassment bot 2000. But he doesn't sound like, he doesn't really get interested. He just says those things because they're nice things for a host to say in 1988.
And she talks about he asked her about the book she published, and she says it's mainly about having a child at age 47. and that she has a restaurant serving Mediterranean food. Okay.
Right there in L.A. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then pretty soon we've got Eartha talking into a microphone off stage, saying, "I'm the real Catwoman." So she comes in and greets everybody. And, then Julie says she has to purr because her purr is way better than her own. Mm-hmm. Which, I think that's not in dispute. I mean, Julie would meow and Eartha would purr. And they were both good at those things, but...
Mm-hmm. Julie said when you walked out, please ask her to purr, but she's got the best purr in the business.
Better than mine, much better.
Much better?
Oh.
All right. Bertha, will you do just a portion?
And Kit's voice is even lower and richer in 1988 than it was in 1967, 68. So she owns it. It's kind of amazing that she can do it it's amazing that she can do it on command.
Now, you probably noticed this too. So Ross trots out his question, how did this show affect your singing career after Batman? And he seems totally oblivious to the whole LBJ mess that came shortly after.
Yeah, hello, Blacklist. Which
we talked about in episode 182 of our podcast. And she nicely avoids that question, or that, what happened to her career after Batman, and talks about how, because of the show, she became more popular among young people. And people come to her shows because they know her as Catwoman. And so that was nice. I mean, once the blacklisting thing passed, I mean, it did affect her career positively, being on Batman. It just took a while.
Yes, and it might, I doubt that it saved her career, but it kept her enough in the public eye that people had different associations with her on a fairly broad scale than they, alongside the LBJ crap.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of lucky to be on a show that ends up getting rerun to infinity, where people decades later still know who that person is. Mm-hmm. So then we have the Romero minute. And
I really enjoyed that. I wish it had gone on for another 30 seconds. It would have been great. But it is hard to believe that he was 81 when that interview was recorded, because he doesn't look a day over 70 and he sounds really vital.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, Ross comes off sounding boneheaded to at least to a dyed-in-the-wool Batman fan, saying, looking at a photo of the Joker and Romero as the Joker, and saying, it looks like the famous Romero mustache is missing.
And Romero says, "Oh no, it's there."
Yeah, it's covered with makeup.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we weren't aware of that either, really, until we kind of came back to the show when the DVD came out. Yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like Ross should have known that if he was going to do an interview with Cesar Romero about being on Batman.
Right, one would think so, but how it was so difficult to see the mustache that I don't think even if we'd been squinting for it and known it was there, we could have seen it on, black and white 480i, resolution television, especially with the kind of reception we were getting back in the 70s.
Channel 7 from far away. So, and Romero talks about how he doesn't understand why he was asked to do the Joker. He'd never done anything like that. Actually, the Bat book answers that question.
Oh.
I looked it up today. Let's see here.
Some Joel Eisner-y goodness coming up.
Well, so he quotes Romero saying pretty much the same thing he said on the show. And then he quotes Dozier saying, "Jose Ferrer was my first choice for the Joker. He either didn't want to do it or couldn't. He has kicked himself ever since. Butch Romero, whom I had known forever, was the second choice for the Joker, and I am not sure he did not turn out better than Jose. I'm not sure that Jose would have captured the frivolity and the ludicrousness of the character. I think he may have taken himself a little too seriously as an actor to do that." And then in parenthesis, Eisner says, in a note to story editor Lorenzo Semple Jr., William Dozier informs him that, quote, We couldn't clear scheduling problems with Jose Ferrer, first choice, and Gig Young, second choice for the Joker. So Dozier didn't remember the Gig Young part of it, apparently, when he asked later. And are going with Cesar Romero, third choice. I think he'll be fine. He's a dancer, you know, moves well, and has both style and menace. With bright green hair and alabaster face, he'll look hugely bizarre. So I think we got an idea there. The style and menace, he's a dancer. I think that pretty well answers the question.
I think so, too.
So, I don't know, maybe Romero never read the Bat book.
Maybe. Well, it had been a long time, but, Romero was playing heavies in the 50s. So he was in the original, maybe early 60s. He was in the original Ocean's 11 as a gangster, one of the bad guys in the show, in the film.
And he was in some Disney movies, too. But anyway.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that darn cat is Cesar Romero.
I don't know if he's in that. He's in, like, Barefoot Executive, maybe.
Oh, that was a great one.
Frank Gorshin's in That Darn Cat.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And of course, Ross has to do that thing you used to do bit and have Caesar do the Joker laugh, which is fun to see.
Oh yeah, he's still quite good at it, and he still improvises it. He's not doing just the same, the laugh that you think of as the ideal Cesar Romero Joker laugh. He does kind of what Gorshin does, although Gorshin really overdoes it. I thought they were going to have to get the paddles out right there on stage. He seems to be having a seizure, going into aneurysm territory.
So then, back in the studio, Yvonne's introduced. She says she was happy that Eartha was going to play Catwoman.
Your nemesis, that's right.
I tell you, I was so happy to know that she was going to be Catwoman because I figured I'd come up to Julie's belly button and I said, I could beat her up. That's great. She's going to be Catwoman.
But Yvonne and Eartha are about the same height, so she says, well, if it's Eartha, I could beat her up. So
it's super funny.
And talks about how she was happy to be on Batman because she was looking for a series, and how she would never have gotten to work with some of those actors had she not been on Batman. Rudy Valley, Ethel Merman, Milton Berle.
Mm-hmm. Although I wondered what her experience with Rudy Valley was like, since he was apparently insufferable on the set to just about everybody else.
Right, yeah. What's the background story on that? And Ross, another, I have to say, boneheaded comment, saying that the fight in the clip, she looked like she was dancing, and she said, "Oh well, I was in the Ballet Russe," and of course Ross didn't know that. He says, "Oh really?" What happened to your research department, Ross?
Yeah, I was going to say, you learn so much interviewing people without doing any research. They'll tell you all kinds of things.
Speaking of the Barefoot Executive, I think that was his research department. The chip.
Yes, well, if that had been the case, this would have been an episode of Devil Dog.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, that's about as obscure as a reference to a Disney movie gets.
Now I'm going to have to watch that movie again.
It's actually really funny from what I remember, but of course, that's my 8-year-old self remembering it, so who knows?
Oh, yeah, I think we loved it when Disney showed it on Sunday night.
Every time the Devil Dog, bumper came on, I just laughed hysterically because repetition, soul of comedy, all that stuff.
Okay, and so now we're like almost at the end. What did I write here? So, remember, 44 and a half minutes. At 41:36, we get George Barris.
Who actually gets an entire story out about the filming of the show.
Yeah, he doesn't have somebody else coming in on a mic saying, I'm the real George Barris.
And purring like a Ford Galaxy.
And another question that is avoided, did you ever have any trouble with the car? Well, we've read that there were lots of troubles with the Batmobile, And Barris just kind of finesses that and goes off into how he played practical jokes on Adam and Bert, switching the controls around in the car.
It probably wouldn't have been made anybody happy at Lincoln to find out that, to have it announced that the Futura could only go like 12 miles an hour. Of course, it was. It was a prototype car, but nevertheless, it's not a good look for any car company.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the George Barris minute, and then 4240 introducing Alan Napier. And the most boneheaded comment of all, Ross says, it seems like you were standing in one position for most of the series. I don't know what the heck he's talking about there. What on earth does he mean? And Alan says no. I'm sorry to spoil your story, but it's not true.
I want to introduce everyone to another a person that was very important to the series. Down here, say hello to Alan Napier, Alfred. Yes, Alan Napier. Alan had a very significant role on the show, but you were standing in one position for most of that series, it seemed. Is that about right?
No, absolutely not. I'm sorry to spoil your story, but it's not true.
Well, I think whatever you would say is probably right. Then I'm wrong, and how can I argue with an English butler? I can't. Everything you say sounds so dignified.
Well, you see, I can explain the English accent that Alfred really is illegitimate.
Oh, he is.
Yes. He's the illegitimate son of Lord Sidcup.
Oh, we should not talk about this on television. This is something that should go in a diary.
Oh, well, then I'll pass it off and say that he was sent to school, one of those only English schools with only accent.
Okay. Thank you very much. Alan Napier, George Barris, Yvonne Craig, thank you so much. Eartha Kitt, Julie Newmar, Adam West, Burt Ward, and Frank Gorshin. Thank you very much. Tomorrow night, the Playboy Playmate of the Year, India Allen, and music from Mr. Mister. Thank you all, folks, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
It's just funny. I guess I misunderstood what Ross said. I thought that he'd said that he was sitting down, and at that point Napier was sitting down, and then in the show he did nothing but stand up.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he did stand up a lot on the show. You hardly ever see Alfred sitting down. That's true. Maybe that's what Ross meant. I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm reminded of Mr. Burns on The Simpsons saying to Smithers, who's that actor? The one who's always, standing and walking. and Smithers says, Rory Calhoun? To which Mr. Burns responds, yes, that's the one. that butler guy who was always standing and walking? Alan Napier, that's him.
The condition of your throat today is really enhancing your Mr. Burns impression.
Oh, excellent. Well, it couldn't get any worse, so I'm glad to have something ailing me to make it a little better.
But I was kind of squirming, too, because I didn't really know what Alan was talking about with Alfred as the illegitimate son of Lord Sidcup.
I thought it was just a charming little story that he made up that would have been great if he'd been on the Johnny Carson show and had like a whole 20 minutes to sit there with Johnny and, shoot the breeze. But no, not possible here.
Yeah. So, I mean, Alan's sitting down, Ross is standing up. And, yeah, as we mentioned, kind of got one eye on the producer telling him, like, you got 10 seconds left. So, I mean, at that point, it's not so much Ross's fault, it's the fault of the whole format of the show.
Oh, I agree, but it's so disheartening to see it and, kind of happen in slow motion, that the microphone slowly drifts away from Alan's mouth and you can hear less and less of him until that's all the time we have, or some such, comes onto the TV speaker.
I was remembering, and I couldn't figure out where it was, that there was some story of I thought that it was in Yvonne's book, and I looked through it and I couldn't find it, but I thought that she had said something about how, like, angry Alan was afterwards. But, I mean, the one reference of Alan Napier in the index didn't refer to that, so I don't know. If anybody else knows what story or where this story is that I'm thinking of, let us know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Napier had passed by the end of the year. Am I right about that?
I didn't check, but yeah, I think it wasn't long after.
I'm going to check it right now. Yes, he died in August of 88.
Wow. So, like 4 months later.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, he's trying to tell the story, and, at his age, he's telling it kind of slowly, and which doesn't help in the amount of time that he's got left.
No, none of this is Alan's fault.
I mean, as far as the show.
Yes, Napier is doing everything he can just to be a gracious guest, and there's no time for it. No time for it at all.
No. Yeah, I mean, if they'd even been able to give him like 5 minutes, it would have been so much better.
Oh, even 3, even 1. I mean,
well, he got 1, barely.
Well,
but,
yes, that's true.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't enough. I mean, I could see why they had George Barris on, but I was kind of like, we don't need this guy. I don't really need George Barris on here.
I felt the same way until I realized if they hadn't brought him on, the Batmobile would have been on stage for nothing.
That's true. I mean,
they probably prop. They could have built a cardboard one, and it would have been just as visibly interesting.
Yeah. Well, they probably couldn't have gotten the Batmobile without having George Barris on the show.
Right, and he says that it was legitimately from the show. It was a stunt. It was the stunt car.
Stunt car. Yeah, car number 5. I didn't remember that there were 5. I thought there were 4, but anyway.
Yes, the stunt concept car. The concept of stunt was embodied in this car.
So, yeah, I mean, there are some nuggets of information in there, but it's just the package is so kind of frustrating.
Yeah, very much so. It feels kind of like a time capsule of, Fox TV in the 80s, or even, kind of mediocre talk shows in the 1980s, and is a better example of that than it is of, a Batman reunion in some ways. But still, to see them and to see them interact, that's all really enjoyable. But, looking around on YouTube after I'd watched the full version without the ads, which does look a lot better than the version that had been circulating before that on YouTube, I noticed that there are things like there's like a Family Feud episode from the mid to late 70s, I think, in which the Batman show takes on Lost in Space. Think of the moments like that we could, compile into a giant heaping, smelly pile of television garbage that nevertheless includes the Batman cast in some way. There must be tons of examples of that. Like maybe the Mike Douglas show, could have had 2 or 3 members of the cast on, or, something along those lines. I think the material is out there. The question is, do we really want to wade through it?
Well, we didn't thoroughly talk about it, but we have referred before to an appearance on Vicki Lawrence's show. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it was Adam, Julie, I can't remember who else now. I think Bob Kane.
Insufferable.
Yeah, there were 5 or 6 bat-related people on her show once, and we talked about that a little bit before, but that's another one that we could mine that's probably still on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm interested in, seeing what's out there now that I've found that Family Feud episode. It's fascinating to see that there might be other, people on the Family Feud show who are even more lascivious acting than Richard Dawson. That's a difficult bar to pass.
Footnote, we found that Ross Shafer is now kind of a motivational speaker, which is sort of interesting. That
living in a van down by the river, like Chris Farley's Saturday Night Live character, the motivational speaker who can't even motivate himself, apparently. But he's won some Emmys, I think, or maybe Grammys for recordings that he's done of motivational books for business people. How to deal with customer friction.
Right.
So we're customers and we're causing friction when we watch the show, or we're feeling friction. So how do you suppose Ross Shafer would deal with that in his 21st century persona?
Don't know.
It was the 80s. Give me a break.
So, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's a thing that exists. So, and
Yes,
it's Batman related. So,
well, yeah. And, to end on a positive note, it is good to see them together. Just one wishes for so much more, but considering the format, considering the host, and considering, Alan Napier's age as well, perhaps there's no other way it could have gone down. So you kids, you should feel lucky that it exists at all.
And I was interested to note how some of the people on stage who never worked together on Batman had nonetheless become good friends. Like it's mentioned that Eartha and Julie had become good friends. And Julie and Frank seemed to know each other pretty well, but they were never in the same episode together. Of course, she was not in the movie. So, but maybe just by the fact that they were all on the show and they've probably been in other reunions or something,
I would imagine so.
They got to know each other.
Right, and, Frank and Julie were both on Star Trek, although not together there either, but still.
Right. And Yvonne.
Hello, I'm Ken Holzhauser, and if you're looking for something new in comic books, may I recommend my newest comic, The Quick and the Dad, a love letter to the DC, Marvel, Archie, and Harvey comics of my youth. This comic has everything. It has spaceships, dad jokes, alien invasions, time travel, supervillains, and so many bad puns. Hopefully you'll like it. It's the cutest comic you've never heard of, and it's available today in print and digital from indieplanet.com. That's The Quick and the Dad. Join that other dynamic duo, won't you?
Join us on Patreon to support the show and get bonus content. For just $2 a month, you get access to outtakes from every To the Bat Polls episode, trivia quiz videos on 20th century entertainment, and the right to vote on future Bat Polls topics. For a $4 monthly donation, you also get the right to have an ad for your own project on the show once a month, and hours of exclusive podcasts. Get all the details at patreon.com/deconcomics and select the level of your monthly donation. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
Here are the stars of that show, the Caped Crusaders, Adam West and Burt Ward. Look at this. Isn't it? Now, see? Does this kind of response surprise you 22 years later, or is this...
Holy adulation.
Ross, that's the wonderful thing about being a part of this thing called Batman. People always have a wonderful warmth and rapport wherever we go in the world.
Yeah, it seems that way.
I guess we've just been around that long. I don't know.
I guess now, have you ever, the show was on 2.5 seasons.
Yes.
That's right. I'm going to ask you first. Did you have any trouble shaking the image, or is that something you didn't want to shake?
Don't do this. Why do we start this way, Ross?
Okay, Bert.
Well, yeah, you can't run around in tights and with your underwear outside your pants and in a mask, obsessively fighting crime every moment of 24 hours a day without it creating a bit of a career problem.
Sure.
However, no, it took several years of just, as Batman might say, you keep punching, Ross.
You keep punching, and you'd go on to other things, but there have to be some
I've
time.
been shot out of cannons in circuses. I've done dinner theater. I've done some turkeys, some good movies, anything I could just to pay the bills and keep going. And sure, I think that's an actor's obligation, don't you, Bert?
Uh-huh. Bat Inbox. Well, ordinarily, we'd be reading your comments about episode 208 this time. But I belatedly discovered, like yesterday, that I somehow spaced off setting up a thread on that episode on the message board. No. So I'm sure people on the message board must have noticed that, but nobody alerted me to it, so it just never happened.
Yes, including your partner, who's always, keeping a careful eye out for such things. Unfortunately, not this time.
We got... if High C were still around, he would have definitely alerted me like 30 seconds after the episode went up.
Oh, yes, that is so true. Merry Christmas, High C, wherever you are.
High C, where are you when we need you?
Yeah.
We got 2 very brief comments via other channels. By email, Steve Small wrote, "Your last episode review... B&W, fill in your preferred soft drink. Thank you, I will be here all week." I think what he's saying is B&W instead of A&W.
Yeah, I
and
think so.
B&W for black and white. Okay.
That sounds good to me. I miss A&W. I don't know if it can be gotten any longer.
Well, I think the root beer is still in cans, but yeah, I don't know if the restaurant exists anywhere anymore.
Probably not. I don't know.
When I worked on Yokota Air Base, they had an A&W there.
Huh.
Not a drive-through, of course, or drive-in.
Yeah,
but
it means something to Tim and me only because it was one of the very few franchise restaurants in Centerville, Iowa, population 5,000 and change when we were growing up.
Yeah. And via YouTube, Pablo Sonic 892 wrote in the comment on that episode 208, "You gentlemen are doing the Lord's work." Holy hagiography.
Oh my gosh. Holy Gordon Gee. This Gordon Gee was the former president of Vanderbilt when I was teaching there. And Gee was a Mormon, and he had some big new faculty reception that I was supposed to go to because I was new faculty that year. It must have been 2003. And I missed it, and I was trying to walk over to it because I was teaching, and I saw Gordon Gee walking out of the reception, and I said, "Oh, President Gee, I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I'm Paul Young, I'm new, and I was teaching." And he said, "Well, you're doing the Lord's work." So... Yeah, the rest of his career was basically a scandal. So but still, it felt good, even though I didn't really agree with it.
So it wasn't Wendell Gee.
No.
The REM song.
Yes. Isn't it Wendell G?
Well, maybe they pronounced it G in the song. It's been a long time since I heard it.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful song, though.
Anyway.
Okay, so last we've got here on 209, and this was actually on the Batman 66 message board.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ewok Chorus, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so this was 209. On Sandman Part 1.
Right. We heard from Crispy Critter, who said, quote, "Holy halftime." No holy hagiography this time. Been looking forward to the show, and now, like Robin, we get a double dose from Sandman. You were asking at the end about the date of the Harold Hornsby column with the Buck Henry interview. Earliest reference I could find in newspapers was January 22nd, 1966.
Yeah, newspapers.com.
Right. It was in the Buffalo News, but it was copyrighted to the Los Angeles Times. Makes sense. The reference to gays in the theater was omitted in Buffalo. Wouldn't play in Buffalo, I guess. The Times didn't publish the column, this time complete, until January 24th.
Okay.
So it must have been in their syndicate.
Yeah. But that's interesting that it would run in one of the newspapers subscribing to that syndicate before it ran in the syndicate's own newspaper.
Yeah, this is a wild guess because, all of this newspaper lore is, lost to time, except for the people who survived who were around at the time. But my wild guess is that the Times would only publish that stuff if they had space. If they ran out of things to print, they would dig into their syndicated stories file and plop one in. But like I said, wild guess.
All right, so we've learned recently that the two other live-action superhero series that came out during the run of Batman are both available on archive.org. So
Yay!
We're planning to hit those here one at a time, and we're going to look at Captain Nice next time.
I can hardly believe it. We have wondered about this for ages, and now it's finally here. So this is pretty exciting, and I love the Internet Archive. Support them, please. They deserve your support.
Yeah, I mean, we looked into this years ago, and on YouTube, all that we could find was the unaired pilot, I think, of Mr. Terrific, which had a different actor playing the title role. But we can get to that when we get to Mr. Terrific. But Captain Nice next time. So, thanks for listening. We'll see you. It will be in 4 weeks this time. See you in 4 weeks. Happy New Year at the same Bat RSS feed. Check the show notes for links to the WDR Big Band version of the theme and the video of the Late Show Batman reunion. If you'd like to drop us a line or recommend any Bat audio that we haven't used yet, let us know at batpulls@deconstructingcomics.com. You can also use that email address to make a donation to the show through PayPal. You can also comment on the thread for each episode and each script at 66batman.com/forums, or on our blog at tothebatpulls.libsyn.com. We're on the social media site formerly known as Twitter, at Decon Comics, and on the Deconstructing Comics channel on YouTube. You can hear outtakes from this and every episode of To the Bat Pulls and vote for topics for future episodes by supporting us at patreon.com/deconcomics. You can also help us out by shopping via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, by sharing our episodes on your social media, and by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And spread the word. Let all your friends who are Batman 66 fans know about the show. This is our last show of 2023. We'll start off the new year with a look at one of the shows that tried to cash in on the Batman craze, Captain Nice. See you January 4th. To the Bat Pulls is a production of DeconstructingComics.com.